inadequacy because we failed before. But when we await assured success before we attempt anything for God, when we base our obedience on past failures, we're essentially awaiting assured success, and we're not embracing the risk that grows our faith. Because whether we understand this or not, sometimes we have to take a little bit of risk in order for our faith to be exercised and to make it grow. And so like Peter, we feel we're the expert and we know better, because sometimes we miss the opportunity to self-examine and say and realize that we're charging ahead of God, and maybe that was why we failed in the first place. And maybe God just needs to kind of have us realize this failure so that he knows that we need to do it his way, or we need to take him along with us. And so maybe we need to take Peter's approach and say, I failed in the past, but I will go there again, and this time I will take God with me.
You know, last Sunday, somebody said amen. I don't know who you were. Somewhere along in my sermon, I thought you were going to call me out. So you can, if you're interested, you can do that again too. In Ezekiel chapter 2, chapter 3, I was a timer here. In chapter 2, 3 and 4, there's the story of this amazing epiphany, this amazing vision, these wheels and angels and beings floating around, and then the Lord spoke to Ezekiel and said, now, I've pumped you all up and I've shown you something special because I have a task for you. And it's going to be difficult, but you're the man. What's that, Lord? Well, I want you to talk to your compatriots, your fellow captives. Ezekiel was in captivity in Babylon. And I want you to explain to them, they think they're going home soon, but it ain't going to happen. They're going to be here for 70 years. So it's kind of like going up to somebody in jail that thinks they're going to be getting out next week and saying, sorry, buddy, you just got your time extended. It's not good news. And it takes a pretty hard-nosed person to be able and willing to deliver bad news. And so the Lord warned Ezekiel that this news, he said, is warning and lament and woe. In other words, this is not happy talk. There's nothing good that you have to tell them. This message, it's not a message that's easy to bear. Who wants to be the bearer of bad news? Who wants to be known as Bad News Bob? Or, well, sorry, Bob, whatever. You know, pessimistic Paul, or whatever. Nobody wants to be that kind of a person. And this is what the Lord said to Ezekiel. He said, by the way, before you go, I'm going to tell you a couple things. First of all, they're going to be stubborn and they will refuse to listen to your message. Secondly, I'm going to make you more stubborn than them. I'm going to put ice water in your veins. I'm going to pump you up so much emotionally and spiritually that your forehead is like a piece of flint. You can ram into the wall of stubbornness and resistance and it's not going to bother you. What Dolly Miller used to call about Steve Miller years ago, his army mode. She said when Steve goes into his army mode, he'll just butt his head through a wall and it won't even bother him. And this is what the Lord said to Ezekiel. I will make you as unyielding and as hardened as they are. And this is a word picture. But he said, you know, oh, another thing, the Lord said, I will not allow you to be afraid. I won't allow you to be soft-hearted or sentimental. You're going to be tough, and you're going to tell the news just like I give it. And then he gave Ezekiel a scroll and in this vision, and he says, eat this. And Ezekiel says, I ate it. The words went inside of me. And then the Lord said, now that you know all this wonderful things, go preach to those people. And Ezekiel said, can you help me out? I don't know what's going on here, Greg. Give me the next slide. Ezekiel said, I'd rather not. And we can understand that kind of reluctance and why he would have said that. Because, you know, his thought, like ours, was, well, Lord, when you got some good news to deliver, get back to me, and I'll see if I can do that. He didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. He didn't want to get sucked in the eye when some guy didn't want to hear what he had to say. I don't know what happened, Greg, but I'm not getting anything, so can you advance me? In fact, here's what he said. Amazingly, he went. He obeyed God. But he said, man, I went with bitterness and anger in my spirit, and the hand of God was strong on me. In other words, God was kind of shoving me along. I went. I did what he told me, but I didn't like it. And I would have rather not done it the whole time. Okay. The point, the thing that we have to ponder is, look, if I'm just going to, I don't know if that's working. I can't get it to. Sorry. If I got to wait until someone I think is going to respond in a positive way, then I'm withholding truth from them. And I've seen this many times in life where I was very tempted not to talk to somebody because I had truth to share with them and I knew they weren't going to want to hear it. Very tempting to just say, I'd rather not. Call me when you got some good news to deliver. But God needs to have His truth delivered into people's hearts and lives. If we refuse because we know that these people are going to get angry and they're not going to hear it, then how's God supposed to touch their hearts through truth and set them free? I'm done, Mark. Stop.
So our next, let me check first.
You're going to have to help us, Greg. We're not doing too well. It's not working here.
So our next case study that we have is the rich man. This is a character that's a little bit different in that he doesn't initially say no to God at first. He's pretty gung-ho. He wants to be a part of what Jesus is doing. But when he finds out what his devotion would entail, then he kind of has some second thoughts and he hesitates. And this, to me, is, maybe it's because it's God talking to me through this, but I feel like this one is the biggest one that we have problems with. This character, this person, it doesn't even have a name. The Bible doesn't even give him a name. Some translations call him the rich young ruler. It makes me think of back in the 80s when we used to call these guys yuppies. Remember when we would say that, this person checks off all these boxes, all the social boxes. They have a lot of wealth, they are young, and they are an important person. And so this is who this guy was. And I admit, I don't know what this guy's motivation was when he runs up to Jesus and says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" But there's a part of me that kind of imagines that maybe perhaps he kind of thinks along the lines of, I've already conquered this world, I've already got this world by the tail, and so just tell me what I need to do so that I can conquer the next world, so that I can get a part of the next life and kind of do things the way that I do around here in this life. And Jesus uses this question of, why do you call me good, to kind of get at the rich young ruler's idea of what it means to actually really be good and penetrate to that concept. And he responds by telling the man to make sure that you keep the commandments. And he lists off a list of them. And it's interesting, if you look at this list of commandments, it's basically like commandments number 5 through 10, and it kind of covers how we as followers are supposed to treat one another. And he kind of leaves out the first 4, which is how we as followers are supposed to treat God. And the rich man quickly responds, well, I've kept all those things. I've kept all those things since I was a kid. And you can see him just checking off the box. And he's thinking, cha-ching, I'm in. I got it. But Jesus looks at him, and my favorite part of these verses is that it says that Jesus looks at him and loves him. Because he already knows what's in this guy's heart, and he knows where he's fallen short, and he knows where this is headed. But he says, okay, but one thing that you lack. Sell everything that you have, give the money to the poor, and then come follow me. And it says that the rich man turns away and walks away very, very sad. Now, the thing is that this is where a lot of us kind of land. And you would say, well, what does selling your riches and giving to the poor have to do with those first 4 commandments of loving God? Jesus knew that this man loved his neighbor as himself, but he had a little bit of problem with loving the Lord with all his heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he proved that by giving him a cost that he was not willing to pay. It wasn't so much the selling of his possessions and giving to the poor. It was more about, hey, I know where you stand when it comes to your own wealth and how important it is to you and that kind of thing. And so the whole point of this is where most of us land. It's like Luke 14. Jesus talks a little bit about all these things that you need to be willing to do to be his disciple. It's basically saying there is going to be a cost if you want to follow me. And if you're not willing to pay that cost, you cannot be my disciple. And this cost is different for each person. Everybody's different. Some have financial issues. Some have all these other problems, but everybody will have a cost that they have to pay in order to be a follower of his. And it's interesting that the Gospels always seem to categorize those that follow Jesus around. It always talked about those that were in the category of being his disciples, the ones who were really interested in following him, and then the crowds. And the people that were the crowds were the ones that were amazed by the way that he taught, the things that he could do, watching him do how he interacted with people and the world around him. But they always wanted to do it from a distance. They always wanted to withhold something back. And so the problem could be that when we say no to God because of the cost, we give that cost priority over God. And so my point is, if you can change to the next slide, is that when we base our obedience on whether we feel we can afford the cost, we are denying God's access to every part of our life. Like the rich man, we say to God, God, you can have dominion over my life, except that one area. And as soon as we say accept, we are not given that dominion that we're promising. And so if your cost is financial, or if you have some sort of problem in that area, or relationships, etc., maybe you have to ask ourselves, do we trust God enough to provide us with whatever it is that we would have to pay in order to follow him? Loving the Lord your God with every aspect of your being means giving him access to every aspect of your being.
I'm not even going to punch my timer. This is short. Pharaoh, the other end of the Moses spectrum. You know, Moses came and said, let them go. Let the people go. Pharaoh said, no. Moses said, God's going to turn the screw. And so there was flies and fleas and frogs and everything you can think of were breaking loose, and darkness and death. And in chapter 10 of Exodus, Moses comes in and says, okay, another day, another stubborn heart here. Tell you what, Pharaoh, tomorrow's going to be locusts. You know, the grasshoppers, they're going to eat everything green that comes out of the ground. And this is amazing to me. In Exodus 10, it says that Pharaoh's officials, now these are the staff and cabinet and all this, even said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let these people go so that they can worship the Lord their God. And Pharaoh says, okay, how many of you have to go? Moses said, all of us. Pharaoh said, he swore. And he said, I will not let you all go. I'll let the men go. We'll keep the women and the children. The men can go. You're free to go. Moses said, we all go. And Pharaoh said, get out of my sight. So, what that seems to me is that Pharaoh is saying, look, in this situation, I'll do part of it. I'll do part of what the Lord wants. But I will not do, oh, that's not it. I was going to try to advance it with my phone here. Sorry. I'll do part of it, but I won't do all of it. Oh, okay, I didn't know that was on there. Go ahead, Greg. We'll see what's next. Pharaoh said, no, only the men go, and then, all right, go ahead. What this says to me is, when we base our obedience on what's left for me, I'll do part of it, but if I do all of it, I won't have anything left. Well, if I get rid of the women and children and men, you'll never come back. But if I keep the women and children, then you'll come back and I'll still have my slaves. So he's basing this on what's in it for him, kind of a bargaining thing. And you know, for human beings, we can bargain with each other because we're kind of equals and co-equals, but let me just close by saying this. If my car started talking, and my car said, tell you what, David, I'll let you pick the roads you want to drive on, but I get to pick where we go. I'd go find a pistol and I'd shoot all four tires. So, if, you know, because I would say to the car then, you know, well, why don't we start this conversation again? Since you seem to think that I exist for your pleasure and for your service instead of the other way around. When we start trying to make deals with God, and we say, I'll do part of what you want, but I won't do all of it, just watch your tires.
So just to quickly summarize what we've been talking about, we looked at six different men in the Bible, and all of them have said no to God for various reasons. And they're different, but there are some similarities throughout. And the question comes up is, why does God ask us to do stuff that we don't want to do? And, you know, we have all this unwillingness and that kind of stuff. And I think the first reason is probably to maybe just demonstrate his glory for no other reason than this, so people can see him at work and in and through imperfect people's lives. As I mentioned with Moses, he was less than perfect and he felt less than capable, but he used him to accomplish his will. And so, over and over in the scriptures, we see demonstrations of God's strength seen in weak people. And Paul was one of them. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, he talks about this thorn in his flesh, and 3 times he asked God to remove it, and 3 times God says no. And God responds to him and says, in verse 9, he says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That's the reason right there, is that when we're a fallen person and he can use us anyway, then it all points back to his glory. And so Paul concludes, "Therefore I'll boast more gladly in my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." When we're taken out of the equation, God is glorified as the source of that power. Also, I believe that not only is God glorified when we respond, our faith grows. There are times when we may not know why God asks us to do something, but when we respond in faith, that faith gets exercised like a muscle, and we are willing to do more and more and more and more. And we start to trust God and let the results up to him, because it's only our job to obey. Others are also observing us when we're doing this, and when they see us exercise our faith, maybe their faith can actually grow as well. There's something infectious about watching somebody stepping out of their comfort zone and doing something for God. So lastly, the last thing I'll say is God asks us to do the things that are difficult because it's how he establishes his kingdom. The Bible brings many examples how the main way he accomplishes his will is through those who follow him. We are the hands and feet, basically. Like God told Moses, he said, "This isn't going to work easy. Pharaoh's going to be stubborn. It's going to take me supernaturally intervening before he's going to do it. But I want you to do it anyway," because he had this long plan of, I believe, to prepare Moses for this long journey that they were probably going to take through the wilderness. It was for this long game of he needed to get something accomplished, and he needed Moses to do it, and he also needed Moses to kind of grow in his faith for them. And so when we step out and say yes to something, even though we don't want to do it, we realize that we're not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for God, and we're doing it for a reason that we may not understand, but he has a reason, and that's all that matters.
Okay. You know, if you could flash back in your mind a second to that picture of those guys trying to pull that steer onto the trailer, I think it's very easy for us to sympathize with the men who are doing the pulling, because most of the time, just like these people that Mark and I have shared about, most of the time this is other people that God is trying to get to do something. And in these cases, like these were people long gone far away, so we're saying, "Yay, God, pull on them." Moses should never have tried to tell God no. Pharaoh should never have tried to bargain with God. I agree, that's not good. If God asks us to do something, we should do it. Most of us would say that, as long as it's somebody else. And here's why. Here's the complicating factor. Because we say, well, yeah, I think we should listen and do what God tells us, and I'm not worried about it because he hasn't called me to do anything. All of you people out there that God asks to do something, you should do it. You shouldn't come up with objections and excuses. As for me, I'm kind of exempt because God's never asked me to do something. And I want to correct that before we finish, to say, yes, he has called you. Yes, he does call you. And yes, he will call you again to ask you to do things. So how do you say, well, how do I know God's calling me? It's not always the bush that burns. It's not always these flamboyant, undeniable, exotic visions like a wheel and angels and so forth. Sometimes it's just by simply letting you realize that you have abilities and talents, and thereby God is calling you. Sometimes it's not necessarily that you feel so talented, but you feel like you have an interest and a passion in something that other people don't seem to have. Why do you have that? Well, because God is asking you to do something specific and something special. And sometimes I think the Lord just does this because he can't get our attention any other way. And we just miss it that he's asking us to do something. So he actually puts a hardship or a need right in front of our face, right in front of our eyes. He lets these scriptures be read right in our hearing, right in our ears, so that we can't miss it and we can't deny it. And we say, wow, I think God actually wants me to do something. And I think back to Peter, and I think this. You know, it's not so terrible if you say to the Lord, I'd rather not, like these men have said. As long as you're willing to get over it. You know, when the Lord first came to Peter and he said, Peter, let's go out there and go fishing. And Peter said, I'd rather not. I already tried that. Did that all night last night. Didn't catch a thing. But it didn't take him long to come around and say, you know what, this is Jesus asking, so I should do it, even if I have already tried it before. And that's when he got so many fish that there was free fish fillet sandwiches for everybody in his village. He caught more fish in that night than he caught in a whole year, because he did something that he'd rather not do. So he said it, but then he got over it. And that's okay. It's when we're stubborn and we refuse to get over it. And we just continue saying, nope, I won't, rather than I'd rather not. But I'll tell you what, because you say, I will do this. I know that you're calling me, you're asking me. That's the burden, that's the goal. That's the place where we can all grow. Let's take a moment and pray together. Lord, I think of this song. We can think of the words of it in our mind. Have your own way, Lord. Have your own way. You're the potter, we are the clay. So mold us and make us after your will. While we here this morning are waiting and yielding and still. Just encourage us to realize that over all the objections, and no matter how unsavory that person may be, that we feel you're asking us to go talk to, over all of the logic that we could use to say, I'd rather not, get a hold of our hearts today, right now. And let us become excited and say, well, you know, I've fished those waters before, but hey, fish move. Maybe there's a school of fish there big enough now that I can't even get them in my boat. I'm going to do it because God is laying it on my heart to do. And even though I kind of object in some ways, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to obey. Have your own way. And we know that through that, not only do we grow, but you bless many, many people. And we want to see that happen from our lives and from the lives of this church, as a community, as a Christian family. We want to see that happen. And so we ask you for it. We bless your holy name. And all God's people together said, Amen.